The man who forged a nation lay dead in a muddy field. He wasn't struck down by the Ottoman Sultan he had defied his entire life. He wasn't killed in a glorious battle against an overwhelming horde. No, he was murdered in his own camp on the orders of the man who called himself an ally. His killer was a general from the Holy Roman Emperor, the very power he had sworn to serve. This isn't fiction. This is the story of how Europe's most ambitious warlord flew too close to the sun and was cut down not by his enemies, but by his friends. This is a real-life Game of Thrones.
To understand the betrayal, you have to understand the debt. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the corrupt heart of the Ottoman Empire, with a man named Mihai. We know him as Michael the Brave. In 1593, he wasn't a king or a conqueror. He was just an ambitious nobleman, a Ban of Volhynia, with a claim to the throne of a small vassal state called Wallachia. But thrones aren't inherited through claims alone. They are bought. Michael borrowed a staggering sum of money from Ottoman and Levantine lenders, a fortune that would haunt him forever, all to bribe the Sultan's court and secure the title of voivode, or prince of Wallachia. He walked into power wearing golden chains, a puppet prince for an empire he secretly despised. The lenders and the Sultan thought they had bought a loyal servant. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. If you appreciate stories of defiance against impossible odds, take a moment to subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes.
For 2 years, Michael played the part. He paid his tribute, he bowed to the Ottoman officials, and he listened to the endless demands of the moneylenders who owned him. But all the while, he was planning. On November 13, 1594, he decided it was time to settle his accounts. He summoned all his Ottoman creditors to a chamber in Bucharest under the pretense of paying them back. They walked in expecting gold. They found steel instead. In a swift, merciless move, Michael had them all arrested and executed. It was a massacre. Simultaneously, he ordered his small army to attack the Ottoman garrison stationed in the city. The message was clear, brutal, and sent shockwaves across the continent. Michael the Brave was done paying his debts with coin. From now on, he would pay them in blood. He had just declared war on the most powerful empire on earth.
A tiny principality declaring war on the Ottoman Empire was suicide. Michael knew this, but he wasn't acting alone. His rebellion was a calculated move, timed to perfection. Far to the west, the Holy Roman Emperor, the eccentric and reclusive Rudolf II, was trying to build a coalition to push the Ottomans out of Europe. This Holy League, backed by the Pope and financed by the Spanish Habsburgs, was a desperate alliance of Christian powers. Michael's bloody declaration of independence was his application letter. He was positioning himself as the indispensable frontline commander, the man willing to do the dirty work on the Danube frontier. He swore allegiance to the emperor, not as a servant, but as an ally in a holy war. He had traded one master for another, more distant one. Or so he thought.
Sultan Murad III was furious. He saw Michael not as a threat, but as an insect to be crushed. He ordered his commanders in the Balkans to deal with the Wallachian upstart. But Michael didn't wait to be attacked. Throughout the harsh winter of 1594 and 1595, he led a series of devastating raids deep into Ottoman territory. His army, though small, was fast and knew the land. They burned forts, sacked towns, and annihilated every Ottoman force sent against them. It was a campaign of pure shock and awe. He wasn't just defending Wallachia, he was taking the fight to the enemy.
proving his worth to his new allies in the Holy League and showing the Sultan that this was no mere peasant revolt. This was a war.
The news of Michael's rampage reached Constantinople, along with the news that Sultan Murad had died. His successor, Mehmed III, was determined to make an example of the rebellious prince. He entrusted the task to his most experienced and brutal commander, the Grand Vizier, Sinan Pasha. This wasn't going to be a small, punitive force. The Sultan was mobilizing the core of the Ottoman army, an estimated 100,000 soldiers, a force of unimaginable size, began the slow march north. Their mission was simple: burn Wallachia to the ground, execute Michael, and turn his principality into an Ottoman province. Against this horde, Michael could muster maybe 16,000 men, a mix of peasants, mercenaries, and loyal boyars. The odds weren't just long, they were impossible.
Michael knew he couldn't face the Ottoman army on an open field. That would be a slaughter. He needed to choose his ground, to turn the terrain itself into a weapon. He found the perfect spot near a village called Călugăreni. It was a swampy, marshy floodplain, bisected by the Nyazlov River. The only way for a large army to cross was over a single, narrow bridge. It was a natural bottleneck, a death trap. Here, the Ottomans' massive numbers would count for nothing. They would be forced to funnel their elite troops into a narrow kill zone, while their cavalry and artillery would be useless, bogged down in the mud. It was a desperate gamble, a plan that relied on perfect execution and unimaginable courage. It was here, in this muddy swamp, that Michael would make his stand. On August 23, 1595, Sinan Pasha's vanguard reached the swamp. Confident in his numbers, he ordered his janissaries to storm the bridge. The battle began with a deafening roar of Wallachian artillery. The cannons tore bloody holes in the tightly packed Ottoman formations, but the janissaries were the best soldiers in the world. They pressed on, absorbing the losses, and crashed onto the bridge. Michael's men met them head-on. For hours the battle raged on that narrow crossing. The Ottomans sent wave after wave of their best troops, but the Wallachian defense held firm. The river below ran red, choked with the bodies of the dead and dying. The swamp had become an altar of war, and the price of crossing was being paid with thousands of lives. But even the bravest defense can break. The sheer pressure of the Ottoman numbers began to tell. The janissaries finally secured a foothold on Michael's side of the river, and the Wallachian line started to crumble. Victory for the Ottomans seemed moments away. It was then that Michael did the unthinkable. Seeing his army about to collapse, he grabbed his battle axe, gathered his personal retinue of 400 cavalry, and personally led a desperate, suicidal charge. He didn't attack the front, he smashed into the flank of the Ottoman force that had just crossed the bridge. The shock of the prince himself leading the charge, fighting like a common soldier in the thick of the melee, stunned the janissaries. In the chaos, Michael was thrown from his horse, but he fought on his feet in the mud until his men could get him back on a fresh mount. His personal bravery electrified his army.
Michael's charge turned the tide. The Ottoman advance stalled, and his reinvigorated troops managed to push them back across the river. By nightfall, the battle was over. Tactically, it was a stunning Wallachian victory. Michael had held his ground against an army 10 times his size and inflicted catastrophic casualties. But strategically, he knew he couldn't stay. The full weight of the Ottoman army was still there, and they could simply find another place to cross. That night, under the cover of darkness, Michael made the difficult decision to retreat. He had won the battle, but he was still losing the war.
He had bloodied the nose of the giant, but the giant was still standing, and it was still in his country.
Michael retreated north towards the mountains to link up with his Christian allies. His main hope was the Prince of Transylvania, a young and erratic man named Sigismund Bathory. Sigismund was also a member of the Holy League, but he was ambitious and deeply distrustful of Michael's growing fame. He offered his help, but at a steep price. In exchange for military support, Michael had to accept Sigismund as his suzerain. He had to become a vassal. The man who had defied the Sultan now had to bend the knee to a petty prince. It was a humiliating deal, but Michael had no choice. He swallowed his pride and accepted. With the Transylvanian army now backing him, he had the strength to go back on the offensive.
The combined army of Michael and Sigismund was a force to be reckoned with. They swept back into Wallachia, catching the occupying Ottoman forces by surprise. Sinan Pasha, who had taken the capital, found himself harassed and cut off from his supply lines. In a series of sharp, decisive battles, the Christian forces liberated the occupied cities one by one. The great Ottoman invasion, which had started with such confidence, ended in a humiliating and bloody retreat. By the end of October 1595, Wallachia was free. Michael the Brave, the vassal prince, had done the impossible. He had faced down the full might of the Ottoman Empire and won. His name was now legendary across Europe.
The years following the victory were a chaotic whirlwind of politics. The Game of Thrones in Eastern Europe was played with dizzying speed. The erratic Sigismund Bathory abdicated his throne in Transylvania, handed it over to the Holy Roman Emperor, then changed his mind and took it back. Then he abdicated again, this time in favor of his cousin, Cardinal Andrew Bathory. This was a disaster for Michael. Andrew Bathory was friendly with Poland and wanted to make peace with the Ottoman Empire, abandoning the Holy League. This would leave Michael completely isolated, surrounded by enemies. The Emperor, Rudolf II, was furious. He saw his influence in the region collapsing, and he gave Michael his tacit approval to solve the problem by any means necessary.
With the Emperor's blessing, Michael saw his chance. He was no longer content to be a vassal prince, a pawn in other kings' games. In October 1599, he invaded Transylvania. He portrayed himself as a loyal commander of the emperor, acting to remove the treacherous Andrew Bathory. At the Battle of Shilimber, Michael's smaller but far more experienced army crushed the Transylvanian forces. Cardinal Andrew fled the field and was later assassinated by anti-Bathory nobles. Michael the Brave rode triumphantly into the Transylvanian capital of Alba Iulia. The son of a minor nobleman, the debtor prince was now the de facto ruler of two principalities. But Michael wasn't finished. With Transylvania secured, he turned his sights on Moldavia to the east. The Polish-backed ruler there, Iremia Movila, was hostile to him and the Holy League. In May of 1600, Michael's army swept into Moldavia. The resistance was minimal. Within weeks, he had conquered his third principality. For the first time in history, the three lands inhabited by the Romanian people, Wallachia, Transylvania, and Moldavia, were united under a single ruler. Michael had achieved something no one had ever thought possible. He was no longer just a voivode. He was the master of a vast territory, a major power in Eastern Europe. He had created a new kingdom on the map. And that was the problem. Michael's stunning success had made him a threat to everyone. The Hungarian nobles in Transylvania despised being ruled by a Wallachian. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth saw him as a dangerous rival on their border. The Ottoman Empire was desperate to reclaim their lost territory and crush the man who had humiliated them.
But the most dangerous enemy was the one he thought was his patron, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. Rudolf had wanted a loyal commander on the frontier, not a new powerful king building his own empire. Michael's unified realm was too strong, too independent. He had become too successful for his own good.
The emperor needed someone to manage the situation, and he had the perfect man for the job, an Italian general named Giorgio Basta. Basta was everything Michael was not. He was a cold, cruel, and ruthlessly efficient professional soldier, a mercenary in the service of the Habsburgs. He had previously fought alongside Michael as an ally, the commander of the emperor's troops in the region. He knew Michael's strengths and weaknesses. Now he was given secret instructions from Prague. Officially, he was to cooperate with Michael to govern Transylvania. Unofficially, his job was to undermine him, to dismantle his power base, and to return Transylvania to the emperor's direct control. The betrayal was now set in motion, and its architect was Michael's own comrade in arms.
Basta began his work subtly. He fanned the flames of resentment among the Hungarian nobility in Transylvania, who were already chafing under Michael's rule. He promised them imperial favor if they helped him oust the Wallachian prince. Soon a full-blown rebellion erupted. The nobles rose up, and with Basta's covert support, they began to attack Michael's garrisons. Michael was forced to march his army back into Transylvania to put down the revolt. He was caught in a trap. While he was busy fighting the rebels, his other two realms, Wallachia and Moldavia, were invaded by Polish and Ottoman-backed forces. His great union was crumbling like sand through his fingers. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Miroslav in September of 1600. Michael brought his army to crush the noble rebellion once and for all. He expected Basta and his imperial troops to fight alongside him. Instead, he arrived at the battlefield to find Basta's army arrayed against him, fighting on the side of the rebels. The betrayal was now open, declared in the universal language of drawn steel and cannon. Michael's army, outnumbered and caught completely by surprise, was utterly defeated. He lost his army, he lost his treasury, and he lost Transylvania. It was a catastrophic blow. In the space of a few months, the ruler of 3 nations was a fugitive with nothing.
Everything was gone. Wallachia and Moldavia had fallen to his enemies. His wife and family were captured. Michael was a wanted man, hunted by his former allies and enemies alike. In a final, desperate gamble, he did the one thing no one expected. He traveled, mostly in disguise, across Europe to the heart of his enemy's territory, the city of Prague. He was going to confront the man who had ordered his downfall, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. For weeks he waited, a powerless exile petitioning for an audience. He wanted to plead his case, to explain his loyalty, and to convince the emperor that he was still a valuable asset, not a threat. Finally, the emperor granted him an audience. Michael, the warrior, had to become a diplomat. He argued his case passionately, reminding Rudolf of his victories against the Ottomans, of his loyalty to the Holy League. He warned the emperor that without him, Transylvania would fall back under Ottoman or Polish influence. And as it happened, events proved him right. The political situation had shifted once again. Sigismund Bathory, the erratic prince, had returned to Transylvania with Polish support and had defeated Basta's imperial army. Suddenly, the emperor had lost control of the very province he had betrayed Michael to secure. Rudolf found himself in a humiliating position. He needed a winner. He needed Michael the Brave. In a stunning reversal of fortune, the emperor agreed to support Michael once more. He gave him 100,000 florins and promised him a new army. There was just one condition, a cruel twist of irony.
He would have to fight alongside the man who had betrayed him, Giorgio Basta. The emperor ordered Basta to put aside his differences with Michael and to work with him to drive Sigismund out of Transylvania. And so, the two bitter rivals, the Wallachian warlord and the Italian mercenary, were forced into an unholy alliance. They were now co-commanders of the imperial army, two scorpions in a bottle, united only by their orders from the emperor. On August 3, 1601, their combined army met Sigismund's forces at the Battle of Călugăreni. It was a masterpiece of tactical cooperation. Michael, leading the cavalry, executed a brilliant flanking maneuver that shattered Sigismund's army. Basta, with his disciplined infantry and artillery, pinned the enemy in place and broke their lines. Together, they were unstoppable. They won a crushing victory. Transylvania was once again under the emperor's control. Michael the Brave was back. He had been vindicated, and he was once again in a position of power, camping with his troops on the plains of Transylvania.
But for Giorgio Basta, the victory was a disaster. He saw how easily Michael had regained the loyalty of the Romanian soldiers. He saw the charisma and the military genius that he, Basta, lacked. He knew with absolute certainty that as long as Michael was alive, the emperor would always have an alternative to him. And worse, he believed Michael was already planning to reclaim Transylvania for himself, independent of the emperor. After the victory, Michael had demanded control of the territory for himself, as promised. Basta saw this not as a just reward, but as proof of his treachery. He wrote a letter to Emperor Rudolf, accusing Michael of renewed treason. He didn't wait for a reply. He decided to solve the Michael problem once and for all.
On the morning of August 9, 1601, just 6 days after their great victory together, Giorgio Basta sent a contingent of German and Walloon mercenaries to Michael's camp near Campia Turzi. Their orders were to arrest him. Michael, confronted in his tent, refused. He was a prince, an ally of the emperor, not some common criminal to be dragged away. He drew his sword. The mercenaries attacked. According to the chronicles, he fought fiercely, but he was outnumbered and taken by surprise. He was run through with a partisan's spear and then beheaded. His head was taken to Basta as proof that the deed was done.
Giorgio Basta had won. He had eliminated his rival and secured Transylvania for his master. But in death, Michael the Brave became more powerful than he ever was in life. His short-lived union of the three principalities became a foundational myth, a dream that would inspire generations of Romanians. Nearly 3 centuries later, when the modern nation of Romania was forged, they would look back to the debtor prince who defied an empire and brought their people together, however briefly. The man murdered in a field by a treacherous ally became the eternal symbol of national unity and independence. He lost the Game of Thrones, but he won a place in history that none of his rivals, not the Sultan, not the emperor, and certainly not Giorgio Basta, could ever hope to achieve. What do you think? Was Michael a visionary hero or just an overambitious warlord who was destined to fail? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.